Welcome to Vision 2222, the podcast where we explore the scientific, technical, social, and human changes that we might see if we were able to travel 2 centuries into the future. We interview leaders in science and technology and experts in business and the humanities to look into the possibilities of the future. Vision 2222 is the brainchild of Mikhail Gladkikh and his co-hosts Amanda Chadee and myself, John Marsh. I'm an administrator at a major research university in Houston, Texas, where I get a ringside seat to the amazing research into the new materials and technologies that will enable us to thrive in the future. Our guest today is Professor Nikolay Osadchiy of Emory University, and Mikhail will introduce him in a moment.
I'm Amanda Chadee, consultant and mentor to early stage startups in biological and life sciences. I specialize in business development and funding strategies to support early stage startups in the big leap from lab discoveries to creating and selling a valuable commercial product.
And I'm your co-host, Mikhail Gladkikh. I'm a technologist. I specialize in 3D printing, digital supply chain, and everything related to Industry 4.0. And today, I'm excited to welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Nikolay Osadchiy. Dr. Osadchiy holds an MS degree from Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology in Applied Mathematics, as well as PhD in Operations Management from the New York University Stern School of Business. Dr. Osadchiy is the Associate Professor of Information Systems and Operations Management at Emory University's Goizueta's Business School, specializing in management of supply networks and revenue management. Nick, welcome to the podcast Vision 2222, and great to have you with us today.
Mikhail, thank you for your kind introduction and thanks for having me. Before we begin, I just would like to say that all opinions that I'm going to express here are my personal ones. And since this is going to be a futuristic podcast, these opinions can be speculative. Some of them are going to be imaginative and sometimes maybe unscientific, although I will try to stick to science and to the truth.
This is understood, and thank you for that introduction. And in this episode, we will talk about the future of supply chains, money, finance, and economics in general. And as Nick just said, this is a discussion. We will talk about the future, but don't take this as a specific prediction of where the markets could go, for example. I'm not going to talk about that.
Usual disclaimers apply.
Usual disclaimers apply, right? So starting with the first question I had, Nick, you specialize in the management of supply chains. One of the trends of post-COVID world embattled with supply chain disruptions, and I think it started to happen even before COVID, it's the drive to deglobalize these supply chains, enabling more local sources to participate, resulting in more reliable, even if more expensive products for consumers. What are your thoughts about this? Is this trend temporary or is this something irreversible as people finally grasp the fragility of globalized supply chains?
Yeah, Mikhail, this is a great question. And, I would like maybe to start with a little bit of a history overview of that. As a phenomenon, global sourcing is a fairly recent thing, right? And in fact, even if you think about human race on a global scale, as global citizens, it's a fairly recent phenomenon too. So, transcontinental travel probably started maybe several hundred years ago, right? Maybe 1,000 years ago by most optimistic estimates. So as a global race, humans, are still fairly recent phenomenon. And we're still, I would say, figuring out how to live together, right? And share the same planet and take good care of it and be good stewards of the place where we live. With supply chains, the time frame is even shorter. So I would say global supply chain, the start of the global supply chain revolution happened with the invention of the shipping container. And that happened in the late 50s, right? So we are really talking about less than 70 years. And In the last 30 years in particular, I think we all enjoyed the benefits of global sourcing, global supply chains. And I would say the benefits covered pretty much all the participants of the global sourcing, right? So the Western hemisphere enjoyed access to cheaper labor and greater production volume. The Eastern Hemisphere enjoyed access to the technology and had sources of employment for lots of their workforce. So overall, I think it was a positive experience over past 30 years. But now, because of the fact that we still live in different countries and countries have their own agendas, these global supply chains as a phenomenon now have some headwinds, right? So, and countries and businesses now thinking about de-risking from this global sourcing types of risks and think, okay, where should we actually source from, right? Should we put all eggs in one basket and just source from one faraway country, or do we want to have some near sourcing, have some local production? So this is a complex system. And as in any complex system, I think we're going to have these oscillations going from one extreme to the other. You know, we started at one extreme where all the production was local, right? And that was occurring probably for up until last 100 years. And then, you know, with the specialization of labor, and then with, inventions of global shipping, we started moving towards more global sourcing. So then that strategy shifted to that other extreme, and now it's coming back. So we're going to have these oscillations, and probably, as in any complex system, we will not reach the equilibrium, although I hope that we can get closer to it. And that would mean collaborating on global scale again, but at the same time, not relinquishing local production capabilities altogether. So that's my answer to it.
Oh, thank you for the history lesson here on supply chains. But I have a comment on that. The trade existed for a very long time, and trade routes and interconnected production centers, that's been in place since very, very old time. And for my new science fiction book, I'm actually learning about the Bronze Age, and the trade system of the Bronze Age extended from Britain to Arabia to India, and it was all interconnected. Wouldn't you call this a global supply chain?
I think the difference is scale, right? And if you think about who got the benefits of that global trade, you know, in the Bronze Age versus 21st century, I would say in the 21st century, it's pretty much every household has benefited from it in the form of lower prices, in the form of better access to a greater variety of products. Whereas earlier, it was probably a very limited number of well-off people. That's what I think about it. But I mean, you certainly have a point. The people explored, people were interested in knowing what around them, and there was trade for sure. We can talk about, you know, whether the trade was fair or not, and all host of related issues. And was it a peaceful trade or not? You probably know a lot more about that. But I think the scale is definitely a factor that has changed over time.
Mm-hmm. And how do you think supply chains of the future would look like 50, 100, 200 years from now? Do you think it's possible to arrive at that equilibrium point that you're talking about, and at maybe fully digital solutions to design, manufacturing, and distribution of products? And my dream here is to see the full elimination of logistics and storage. Do you think it's possible?
I will get to that. I think it's a dream, though. So, but you know, first things first. So, how supply chains are going to look like? So, I think they're going to become even more specialized and I would say compartmentalized. In fact, I have a working paper right now where we study evolution of supply networks over the past 20 years. So 20 years is a fairly short time frame on the global scale, but that's the time frame for which we have data on supply network evolution. And what we find is that supply networks become exactly that. They become more specialized. And the term that we actually use, that we call them more fragmented. So what does that fragmentation mean? It basically means that in the supply network, there emerge parts of the network where actors are densely connected. At the same time, the connections between those parts in the network are very sparse. So you can think about clusters emerging that are densely connected within, but very loosely and sparsely connected between. And I think that trend is expected to continue. Now, it does present some challenges for the issues of visibility into the production and supply chains, challenges for risk management, etc. So that's something that we're thinking about how to address those issues. But I think that trend of increasing fragmentation is going to continue for foreseeable future, so long as the technology becomes more complex, product become more differentiated, so on and so forth. So another thing that I would say is that we're going to see some more standardization in supply chain. And this may be related to that ultimate dream of yours of eliminating logistics altogether. So for example, there is this concept of physical internet that has been offered a few years ago, which basically uses the internet traffic analogy for physical shipments. So imagine a physical shipments being routed in the same way as internet traffic packets are routed through the network of connections. For that, each shipment has to have the same size, like internet protocol packet, and it has to have a standardized header, so which would have the routing information. And based on that, that shipment will be routed to its destination through a standardized network. And in terms of medium for that network, one can think maybe about a pipeline of sorts, or maybe some sort of hyperloop. So basically some sort of physical infrastructure that will handle these bite-sized packages that will be delivered very quickly, reliably to its final destination.
Now, this is fascinating. And again, I think I have the same analogy in my mind right now. And you talked about fragmentation of supply chains, going back to my Bronze Age analogy, kind of back to the future.
Yeah, second part of your question was about digitization. And yes, it is definitely a trend, and it's likely going to continue, as I said, as long as we as consumers put premium on customized products. So product design, I would say, is already digitized. Manufacturing is digitized to some degree, at least in the stages of manufacturing that are closer to the final product. And the distribution will likely be substituted by digital for customized physical products. But this is not to say that this is going to be the same effect in all stages of production. So for example, basic materials will still need to be mined. Food will still need to be grown. And if we think about long-term sustainability, then we also need to think about our carbon footprint, and that carbon somehow needs to be captured and hopefully reused. So these are all very physical areas, and digitization in these areas of supply chain is unlikely. So I would say downstream and supply chains, yes, you will have more digitization. Upstream in supply chain, it's still unlikely and perhaps even physically impossible.
And this leads to my next question nicely, talking about the commodities and that upstream of supply chain. You recently co-authored an article in Harvard Business Publishing addressing supply-demand bottlenecks in energy markets, and specifically in liquefied natural gas, or LNG markets. Can you talk about the main points of that study? Why LNG specifically? Do you consider this technology to be one of the foundational, pivotal elements of the energy supply chain of the future? Or is it just a proper example you wanted to illustrate?
So LNG is an interesting phenomenon, and I use this case to illustrate a fundamental principle of supply chains. That supply chain needs to serve the baseline demand and variable demand, right? So typically demand is unpredictable, yet large part of this demand repeats from period to period, right? And so that's what we call baseline demand. And then there is variability, those peaks and valleys of demand that also occur. Now, those supply chains that serve baseline demand and variable demand need not be the same. And I would say they should not be the same, because if they were the same, that would not be economical. So in the context of natural gas, baseline demand is typically served by pipeline. But when demand happens to be especially high, maybe on an exceptionally cold day, or maybe exceptionally hot day where gas is used to generate electricity to power air conditioning, transporting those excessive demand of gas with the pipeline network is expensive, and it puts strain on the equipment and drastically increases maintenance costs. So pipeline operators are very much aware of that, and they charge premium prices, disproportionately high prices depending on the volume that is pushed through the pipeline. So in this type of situation, enter LNG. LNG is the form of energy, right? It's a form of gas, liquefied gas. It's a more energetically dense form that can be transported by alternative means. So it doesn't have to be transported through a pipeline. In fact, if it's liquefied, it will be transported by a specialized trailer. And then it will be transported close to the customers that experience high demand. And it will be injected and regasified near those customers, very close to the consumption location, bypassing the pipeline network. So in that way, basically LNG becomes economical, right? It makes economic sense to use LNG, although by itself, LNG is actually quite expensive. If you think about extraction, liquefaction, transportation, storage, regasification, this all costs money. But if you compare it to the cost of pushing excessive amounts of gas through the pipeline network when the weather is especially cold or especially hot, in those type of situations, LNG is economically available. And of course, yeah, so right now LNG is now a global commodity pretty much, thanks to the technology. I would say LNG probably started, and again, probably correct me here if I'm wrong, I think it started in the 60s, right? And one of the first sources of LNG, liquefaction plants, was in Algeria. And the use case was to transport this LNG from Algeria to Boston Harbor and use it in the utility in Boston. So in that case, in that Harvard case that you mentioned, we talk about similar ideas, but bringing LNG to California. So that's what the case is about. But again, the fundamental thing is that you need to have different supply chains for baseline demand and variable demand. And the baseline typically is going to be served by a pipeline or some economical source of energy with predicted stable output. And LNG is useful to serve variable demand. Now, to your second part of the question, whether LNG is going to be a central element of energy supply chain in the future, I'm not so sure about that, because if we think long-term sustainability of humans, then we should probably be thinking about cleaner energy sources. So think about solar, wind, or tidal, or even better, maybe going to basic physics and figuring out how to get nuclear fusion going. So that I would say is a more promising future. For now, we have LNG.
And I have a lot of hope for nuclear fusion. I think eventually, if we need a lot of energy, cheaper energy, that's the solution, because that's the thing that universe is using, and we need to figure it out.
Exactly. That is the most basic source of energy, due to which we actually all exist.
Exactly. We need to figure it out. But then to your point about wind and solar, now we're having the same issue with fragmentation, because there's no global supply chain that exists for wind and solar. All these networks are pretty much isolated.
Yes, you're absolutely right. So wind and solar does not solve baseline supply of energy. Again, one would hope that nuclear fusion will get that problem solved. But for now, we have nuclear fission. So that is a very reliable source of energy with very predictable output and relatively clean too. So perhaps that can be a consideration.
Yeah, and that's also one of my questions. Why are we slowing it down and closing the plants, nuclear plants all over?
Well, yeah, I guess Chernobyl and then the subsequent movie on that had some effect and scared some people. So which is understandable. I mean, nuclear disasters do happen, and when they happen, it's really devastating. That said, the technology now is much more ahead. So, like those Chernobyl style reactors are pretty much no longer used, and I think they are no longer produced. They may be still in use in some part of the world, but typically there are more safe designs that are in use now.
And then Fukushima was more recent disaster as well.
Correct. Fukushima, yes. But Fukushima happened because that reactor did not have access to electricity to cool it down. And that was basically the key problem. So the reactor and actually did not explode, right? So what happened is just simply kind of melted through. And there was some release of radioactive materials, but on a lesser scale, much lesser scale compared to Chernobyl.
Okay, so we're gonna switch topics a little bit here, Nick, and we are going to start the conversation about the future of money. So I actually read a CNBC article today, and it quotes that in 2019, roughly 3 in 10 adults in the US said that they made zero purchases using cash. And the people that actually carried cash in their wallets carried less than $50. I remember times when there was nothing more solid than having currency. Cash was the king. We were exchanging goods and services for what is essentially electronic records, bytes of information that have no intrinsic value. This is a very different economy from what we've even had 20 to 30 years ago. Where do you think this trend in money or in commerce is going? The future of money and financial transactions, do you think?
Excellent question, Samantha. So indeed, we substituted paper cash for electronic cash, and that substitution went fairly quickly. One thing I want to comment on is that if you think about paper money, the paper bill, it doesn't have much of intrinsic value either, right? Because it's basically just paper with some print on top of it. The value is embedded into it by the fact that this paper is accepted as a form of payment, right? And in that sense, whether that value comes embedded to the piece of paper or to an electronic record probably doesn't matter as much. Another thing about money is, I think it's useful to think what is the role of money in the economy. And there are basically three things. So money store value, that's number one. Money serve as a unit of account. So for example, if you compare the value of, for example, one sheep versus value of one automobile, right? So we need that comparison. And the natural comparison would be express the value of each of these units in terms of money. And then the third role of money is that it is a medium of exchange, right? So if you want to exchange X ships to the one automobile, that's one way to do it, but you can sell ships in the marketplace and then buy one car from a dealer, right? So that's probably the easier way to do that. So those are the three roles of money. And in that sense, I think they are going to very much remain in the future because it's the money have been invented pretty long time ago, right? And again, Mikhail probably knows a lot about that from historical perspective, but we find those coins, in these historical explorations. So the future of money, I think, is going to preserve the role of money. We do need to store value. We do need to trade or exchange our goods somehow. And we do need to measure the value of the products that we own, that we produce, that we buy and sell. So those 3 points in the role of money are still going to be preserved. And whether or not they're going to be paper or electronic, or whether or not they're going to be to live on some sort of distributed ledger, that's really up to the technology, and I think up to the most convenient way and the most economical way of achieving those 3 roles of money.
I want to clarify something. So you said paper money as well as electronic money, there is no intrinsic value. Now, if I look back to, say, the beginning of the 20th century, the paper money that we had was linked to the value of gold. And it was guaranteed, and you always knew that, no, if you have $1, you can go to the government and exchange it for some fixed amount of gold, right? So the gold standard. As we now shifted to fiat economy, that link is broken, and that intrinsic value exists, at least the way I see it, and please correct me if I'm wrong. That intrinsic value is because economic systems, world economic systems, guarantee that you're going to have the exchange, that exchange value will be preserved, and the currencies that you have, you can then exchange them for the goods that you need. So what is the difference here, and why I hear some people call, like, yeah, we need to get back to the golden standard, there's inflation and then all of that, and then we will fix all of these issues. Why do you think this is not a good idea? Or maybe it is.
Well, it's a good question. I maybe not necessarily have an answer to that, but I have another question. Why gold? And I think the answer to that is that it's something that
Retains
is
its
rooted in the
value, right?
well, there are many things that retain value.
I think it's historical more than anything
Or
else.
oil,
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
I would say maybe something like lithium, right, or some commodity that is very useful, right? Gold is not particularly useful. So I think people realize that, right? So the why gold, and the conclusion was that okay, it's basically just a convention that we all agreed upon, that we exchange gold to each other and we believe that it holds value. And then the next logical step is that okay, well, if we just believe that, why don't we believe ourselves? You know, essentially we trust each other. We trust governments when they issue money, and we accept that as a form of payment. And as long as there is a trust, then we don't need gold, right? And if there is no trust, then gold itself is useless. So perhaps that is the logical chain here.
And one thing I want to have the listeners take away, and I guess not many people really wrap their heads around the roles of money. You know, we get money, we spend money, for material things. So your 3 points that you made was that money, and correct me if I'm wrong, it has value, it's a unit of accountability, and it's a medium of exchange.
Correct.
Yeah,
It's
please.
storage of value, right? So
Storage value.
it's not
Okay.
intrinsic value. It's a storage of value, which I think
So okay.
in terms of
Can you
fiat
explain
money,
that?
in terms of fiat money, it's basically a representation of trust. So you
I see.
hold this piece of paper, or you hold this electronic record that you can see from your bank account website, and what it gives you an opportunity to get your consumption deferred into the future, right? So you could, for
Right.
example, you sold something, right, or you maybe produced some good or service, and in exchange you could have enjoyed some consumption immediately, right? But maybe for some reasons you don't want to do that. Instead, you want to defer it and have it in the future. So money gives you the way to do that, to store that value that you created.
And so moving now from, the paper currency to what we have presently, cryptocurrency. A definition that I know of cryptocurrency is that it's a digital payment system, and it really doesn't rely on banks to verify transaction. And most people are aware of Bitcoin, one of the first cryptocurrencies to appear in 2009. And it continues to be the best known today. Then we have the recent NFTs, which are, I guess, are a unique type of cryptocurrencies. So tell our listeners, what are your thoughts on cryptocurrencies? Do they have a place in the financial systems of tomorrow? And what, if any, developments we should be watching, such as these NFTs, or now we have the metaverse? Do you think that this is just, a hot trend right now that will eventually go away, or do you think that it's here to stay for our future?
Great questions. I think we need to make a distinction here between cryptocurrencies as sort of phenomenon and the underlying technology, specifically blockchain. Cryptocurrencies as a form of exchange, definitely valuable. As a form of value storage, they happen to be quite volatile. So the answer here is unclear. And similarly, as a unit of account, they're also because of volatility, the value here is unclear. But as a medium of exchange, so for example, if you want to quickly transact with someone and convert fiat money to crypto and then have the transaction and back to fiat again, then perhaps that can be done. What is the value of this of using crypto as this type of intermediary? Well, it probably depends on application, so it's hard to say, hard to give a blanket answer. As the underlying technology, blockchain, I think, is very valuable, though, because essentially what it gives you a record that is shared between everyone. So you can think about blockchain as a sort of a glue. If you think about information systems, they are fragmented, right? Like supply chains. Information systems are also specialized, and they cover each specific sort of area of a firm or between firm network. So how do you enable the communication between those information systems? Well, this is a notoriously difficult problem, right? And lots of professionals in information technology field, they basically make those systems communicate with one another. Now enter blockchain. So blockchain basically has this data that is updated by multiple actors. The data is in roughly similar format, and everybody who is in that blockchain has access to the entire blockchain. So that solves that problem of integration between those separate information systems. And I think this is the biggest value of blockchain. Now, of course, there are some technical hurdles that need to be overcome for that really become for blockchain really become valuable. For example, these algorithms of proof of work, where actors solve increasingly difficult cryptographic problems. That's energy intensive, and that needs to change, right? So probably that difficulty in cryptographic puzzles needs to be substituted by trust, right? So if the intentions of participants in blockchain are good, then there is no need for this excessive security level, and therefore savings could be realized on the side of energy intensity and cost. So I would say blockchain is valuable. Cryptocurrencies, I'm not so sure. Now, NFTs and metaverse, this is potentially very interesting and thorny question. Metaverse might, and the keyword here is might become our real verse, right? And it's some sort of this anti-utopian scenario, I would say, where if you can imagine, like, the cost of living in real world becomes prohibitively high, then maybe metaverse becomes an economical way for people to sustain living. And again, this is very hard to imagine right now. And this is one of those speculative parts, I guess, that we're discussing right now. And I hope it will never happen. But metaverse, might be actually a way of living for us as humans. In that sense, I think this movie Matrix, right, might be a very prescient movie, given this idea of humans living in the computer simulated virtual reality, and basically their physical being is being sustained at a very rudimentary level, and in fact used by machines to produce electricity. Again, very difficult, hard reality to imagine, but who knows, right? 200 years is a long time.
And your thoughts on NFTs, because this is something I'm curious about, because I read some articles on it, and I saw a few NFTs being sold for thousands of dollars, even millions of dollars. Is this trend going to continue, or do you think it will eventually go away?
Well, again, the origins of NFTs are somewhat similar to the origins of fine art. So we are not surprised when a painting by Picasso is being sold for millions of dollars. So what if someone creates a digital object and that object is guaranteed to be unique and that object is sold for some money? So can that sum of money be equal to millions of dollars? I guess yes. The question now becomes that how do you guarantee authenticity and uniqueness of that digital object? Well, an NFT, which stands for non-fungible token, basically is a way to more or less guarantee that. So the culprit here is that digital objects are replicable. In fact, they're freely replicable and they're infinitely replicable. To some extent, fine art is also replicable, right? So there are some counterfeits of famous paintings, but they are more rare simply because the level of mastership and the level of craft, the finesse is very hard to replicate by a different person. So, but nonetheless, right? So if a digital object is unique and it has some value to some people, I guess the answer is yes, it can be sold for a lot of money. So in that sense, I think NFT has some promise. But another question would be, does it mean that every digital object will have high value? And the answer to that, I think, is no, right? Because there are lots of paintings, and each of us probably drew some paintings, at least when we were kids. But they have only sentimental values for parents, and maybe for us as we grow older, but not for broader public. So probably the same situation with digital assets. Right? Not every digital asset is going to be valued at millions.
And so far, we've talked a lot about the currency, money. You gave a really good explanation of blockchain and cryptocurrencies. So this has, really been informative to just understand the future of finance. So we want to talk now a little more about both near and far. And based on all the technologies that we spoke about today, what excites you in these technological trends? It can be finance, supply chains, or in any other fields. What new discoveries and applications should we expect in the short and medium term? So let's just start off within the next 10 to 30 years. Start the discussion there.
Okay, we're all humans, right? So in that sense, we have some, we want to live longer, we want our lives to be better, right? So there's some basic human desires. So from that perspective, I think what we had in life sciences in the past 30 years and probably in the next future years is very transformative. So human genome sequencing was a very big deal. And now we're at the stage where personalized treatments and medicines are being developed. And hopefully that will increase life expectancy of humans. We're also working on a variety of diseases, vaccines, and we can do it fairly quickly, as the recent COVID pandemic showed. So the vaccine has been developed very, very quickly. And that's thanks to that new groundbreaking technology, which, by the way, nobody believed in 15 years ago, but it happened to be a great thing, this mRNA. So I think in the field of life sciences, we're going to see breakthrough, right? So personalized treatments, I think specifically in the areas of, oncology, heart disease. So basically all the main killers of humans, right? So that's big.
And so that, that's, I agree that in the short term, there's been a tremendous leap in the discoveries in life sciences. And also in the future, we're obviously going to have problems as a human civilization and growing. So let's look even further on in 50 years, 100 years, or in 200 years, by the year 2222, if so humanity even survives that long. Could your imagination stretch beyond that and tell us what some of the things you think our future
Yeah,
holds?
I think I know where you're going with this, and yeah, probably with increased life expectancy and the planet Earth being a relatively small space, still not fully inhabited space, but nonetheless relatively small. Humans should be thinking about becoming multiplanetary, right? And so, luckily, we have Mars close by. So that is probably something that is going to happen in the next, I would say, 100 years, maybe even sooner. The alternative to that would be living in the metaverse. And here again, we can have a debate where you like living better, in the metaverse or on Mars, in the metaverse virtually or in the Mars for real. So I think people will have different preferences here. So something again that we need to think about. And to get to 200 years from now, we need to think really about our carbon footprint, climate change, also the relationship between countries, and coming to a realization that we are one human race, right? Despite all our differences, we have way more in common. And that should be, I think, our shared mutual understanding if we want to survive in peace for the next 200 years.
And remarkably, this has been, a common answer is that, to survive into 200 years, we have to put a lot of emphasis on our, as a humanity, on humans and politics, or, just how we survive as a species. So that is always such a, it's interesting that a lot of people answer that. And then I like, what you said about either it's the metaverse or it's travel to Mars.
Well, hopefully it's not either or.
Or both.
Maybe not necessarily both. Maybe there's a third option, right? Because I don't think any of us is willing to subscribe to to either of the two options if they're the only two that are being presented to us. Again, the hope is that somehow we, as humans, become more tolerant, more helping, and we are, right? So if you think about your neighborhood, right? So typically help our neighbors and we get along well, right? On a global scale, somehow it doesn't happen that readily. So we need to figure out why.
Great, thank you so much, Nick.
Yeah, and just we talked about two options. I think there is a third option I just thought about, which is also pretty gloomy, is population control. If we're facing overpopulation and we have a small planet and we're facing climate change and all this stuff, well, maybe population should be reduced. That's another gloomy scenario that we could see.
Yeah, none of these options seems to be very appetizing right now. So I think we'll need to keep thinking and maybe come up with more.
Right, and I appreciate your optimism, Nick. I think we'll figure it out. I'm an optimist as well. We need to figure it out. We need to go to the stars and other planets
and come back.
And come back, yes, and have so instead of interplanetary economy, I see we need to build the solar system economy and beyond. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
So thank you for taking this imaginary trip into the future with us. At this point, I'd like to ask you a question we ask every guest speaker. Do you think the actual time travel is possible? If yes, is it only forward, only backward, or both ways? And the second part of the question is, if you had just a chance for just one trip, either back or forward in time, where would you go and why?
So here I think, I can maybe give a little bit of a boring answer, but that answer that is grounded in research. So there was a paper a couple of years ago from some physicists who were studying quantum physics and basically were studying this evolution of quantum physics, of quantum systems. It's related to quantum computing, right? So it's you basically have a quantum state that evolves to the next state. And what they claim in that paper that they were able to reverse, so basically to turn back time and come back to the previous state of the quantum system, which is pretty amazing, right? So it's like basically traveling back in time. Now, of course, it is a very minuscule type of travel. And I think even in the article, they say that it's not really time travel. It's more like a plain tape, like a tape with the music backwards, right?
Are you referring to what's called a time crystal?
Not sure about that. I think it might be different.
So that time crystal, what I've read about this as well in relation to quantum systems, is that the quantum system can repeat its states without the loss of energy in time. So if you imagine the crystal in space that repeats the structure, now you imagine the quantum system in time that repeats the sequence of states without the loss of energy.
That could be. I'm not sure, but I think that this assumes some sort of cyclicality of the system, and that may not work for all types, all states.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Let me defer on that. As for the time travel, personally, I don't know if I want any at that moment because I'm pretty content where I am, and but I would probably have an option of time travel. So, for example, if we reach a situation where some disaster happens, right? If we have an option of going back into the past and basically communicating and convincing our past selves that what we were doing would lead to that disaster and we should change that course, then I think that option would be valuable, and I would probably execute that.
So is there any specific travel at this point where you would say, yes, I'd like to go back and do that? Maybe
No,
there's a disaster.
No, like I said, I'm pretty content where I am. So
okay.
Don't need that.
Don't need that. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you, Nick. I appreciate your comments and insights on that matter. And just to summarize the discussion, the episode, I think it was very, very educational and instructive and insightful. So, Nick, thank you very much for your time and sharing your wisdom with us here. We've learned a lot about the evolution of supply chains, supply networks, the evolution of money, the future of supply chain. I am fascinated by this topic of Internet of Physical Goods. I think this is something to watch for in the future, but lots of other things, of course. And we talked about cryptocurrencies. And what bothers me with our discussion is the number of choices for the evolution of humanity that we highlighted here, especially that potential existence in the matrix or in the metaverse is not something I'm really looking forward to. So at this point, Nick, do you have any additional remarks or any comments to our listeners? And also, where could they find your work if they're interested?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me, and thank you for running this podcast. I think one conclusion from this interview, which I enjoyed a lot, is that this podcast should continue. And the fact that we have not come up with the option number 4 basically means that we should keep searching, right? And I think, part of that option number 4 is basically status quo, right? That probably something that everybody would be sort of comfortable with, right? The question is how to maintain it and how to make it better. So keep doing what you're doing. This is excellent and intellectually stimulating discussion. For anyone who wants more information about fragmented supply networks or separating baseline demand in supply chains versus variable demand, by the way, that is called supply chain tailoring, you can find some of my works on my webpage. It's nikolayosadchiy.com. So if you just simply Google my name, I think it's going to be one of the top links. And, thank you again.
No, thank you, Nick. I really appreciate sharing this with us.
Thank you, Nick. We thoroughly enjoyed the discussion today, and it was a pleasure having you on Vision 2222 podcast.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Mikhail.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Vision 2222. And if you enjoyed what you heard, please subscribe, like, and share with your friends. Please also comment, and we'll do our best to respond.